Queen Isabella was known across the kingdom for her beauty and kindness. She lived in a grand palace surrounded by luxury and servants who obeyed her every command. Yet, her heart felt empty. She often looked out from her golden balcony, wondering what life was like beyond the palace walls. One evening, Isabella decided to disguise herself as a simple woman and walk among the people in the village. Wearing a plain dress and covering her face with a scarf, she stepped out into the bustling streets. For the first time, she felt free. As she wandered, she heard a soft tune coming from a small corner of the village. There sat a young man, Ethan, playing a wooden flute. His music was beautiful, and his face was kind. Isabella was drawn to him immediately. She approached him, and they started talking. Ethan was a poor boy who worked hard every day to make a living. He shared stories of his struggles, but his smile never faded. Isabella admired his strength and honesty. They laughed and talked for hours, and for the first time, Isabella felt truly happy. Ethan didn't know that the woman in front of him was a queen. To him, she was just a kind stranger who listened to his stories. Isabella didn't tell him the truth, afraid he would treat her differently. She wanted to keep this connection pure. Days turned into weeks, and Isabella found excuses to visit Ethan in the village. They grew closer, and her feelings for him deepened. But something strange began to happen. One evening, as Isabella was about to leave Ethan's house, she felt a sudden chill in the air. The small lamp on the table flickered, and the shadows in the room seemed to move. Ethan noticed it too but brushed it off as the wind. Isabella, however, felt uneasy. It was as if someone was watching her. She quickly said goodbye and returned to the palace. That night, as she lay in her grand bed, a cold wind swept through her room. She shivered, and then, in the corner of the room, she thought she saw a dark shadow. Her heart raced. Was her secret love putting her in danger? The next morning, Queen Isabella couldn't forget the strange events of the night before. The shadow in her room felt too real to be her imagination. She tried to focus on her royal duties, but her mind kept returning to Ethan. That evening, Isabella returned to the village. She was eager to see Ethan again, hoping his kind smile would ease her fear. When she arrived at his small home, he greeted her warmly, but she noticed something strange in his eyes, concern, or maybe worry. As they sat together, sharing stories, the room grew cold. The gentle light of the candle started flickering violently, as if an invisible hand was blowing on it. Isabella shivered. It happens sometimes, Ethan said, trying to reassure her. This house is old, maybe the wind finds its way in. But Isabella wasn't convinced. The cold felt unnatural, and the flickering light made her uneasy. She decided not to mention it and stayed quiet. When she returned to the palace that night, she felt the same chilling presence she had felt before. As she entered her grand bedroom, the air turned icy. The curtains moved even though the windows were closed. Isabella froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, she saw it again, a shadowy figure standing near the window. It was the shape of a woman, with long, messy hair and hollow eyes. Isabella gasped and stepped back, her body trembling. "Leave him alone," the figure said in a voice that was cold and sharp. "He is not yours." Before Isabella could scream, the shadow disappeared into thin air. She stood there, shaking, as the door burst open and the guards rushed in. "Your Majesty, is something wrong?" one of them asked, looking around the room. Isabella wanted to tell them what she saw, but the words wouldn't come out. She didn't want anyone to know about Ethan or the spirit. Instead, she shook her head and said, "It's nothing. I'm fine." But deep down, she knew she wasn't fine. Something or someone was trying to warn her. And she feared this was only the beginning. Queen Isabella tried to stay calm, but the chilling presence followed her everywhere. Days turned into sleepless nights, and her once bright smile began to fade. The shadowy figure haunted her thoughts, and the mysterious warning echoed in her ears, "Leave him alone. He is not yours." Determined to find answers, Isabella returned to Ethan's small home. This time, she decided to ask him about his past. As they sat outside under the stars, she asked softly, "Ethan, what happened to your family? I mean, your parents." Ethan's smile faded, and sadness filled his eyes. "My father left us when I was very young," he said. "It was just my mother and me after that. She worked hard, but, he hesitated, his voice breaking. She died in a fire years ago. I couldn't save her. I've carried that guilt ever since. Isabella placed a comforting hand on his. It wasn't your fault, Ethan, she said gently. But her heart raced as she realized the truth. The spirit haunting her might be Ethan's mother. That night, back at the palace, the haunting grew worse. Mirrors cracked when Isabella looked into them. The sound of faint whispers filled the halls, but no one else could hear them. Servants noticed her pale face and trembling hands, but Isabella dismissed their concerns. One night, she woke up to find her room ice cold. She sat up in bed, and there it was, the shadowy figure of Ethan's mother standing at the foot of her bed. "You don't belong with him," the spirit hissed. Her hollow eyes stared deep into Isabella's soul, and her voice was filled with anger. "You will ruin his life, just like others ruined mine." Isabella's body froze with fear. "I love him," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I would never hurt him." The spirit let out a sharp, chilling laugh. "Love? A queen and a poor boy? Your world will destroy him. Stay away, or I will make sure you regret it." The figure vanished, but the warning lingered. Isabella realized that this was no ordinary haunting. The spirit of Ethan's mother was determined to drive her away. The question was, how far would the spirit go? Queen Isabella could no longer ignore the terror consuming her life. The haunting grew stronger every day. The spirit of Ethan's mother seemed to follow her everywhere, in the palace halls, the gardens, and even in her dreams. Her once joyful connection with Ethan now felt like a dangerous secret. Determined to protect both herself and Ethan, Isabella sought help. She summoned the palace priest, an old man known for his wisdom in dealing with the supernatural. She told him everything, the love she had for Ethan and the spirit that wouldn't leave her alone. The priest listened carefully and then spoke. "The spirit is bound by deep emotions, love and fear. Her anger comes from her protective nature. She believes you will harm her son, even if that is not your intention. Can you make her leave?" Isabella asked desperately. "I can try," the priest replied. "But the bond between her and her son is strong. She may not leave willingly." That evening, the priest performed a cleansing ritual in Isabella's chambers. He burned herbs and chanted prayers, asking the spirit to let go of her anger. For a moment, the air felt lighter, and Isabella thought it was over. But as the priest finished, the candles in the room blew out, and a furious scream echoed through the palace. "You will not take him from me." The spirit's voice was louder and more threatening than ever. Objects in the room began to shake and fall to the floor. Isabella clutched her chest, her heart pounding with fear. The priest turned to her, his face pale. "Her anger is too great. She won't be easily stopped." That night, the spirit grew bolder. Isabella found herself locked inside her bedroom as eerie whispers surrounded her. On the walls, blood-red words appeared, "Leave him, or I will destroy you." Asterisk. Terrified, Isabella knew she couldn't face this alone. The next day, she met Ethan in the village and told him everything. She confessed her identity as the queen in the haunting that had been tormenting her. Ethan was shocked but heartbroken. "This is my fault," he said, tears in his eyes. "My mother never trusted anyone. She thinks I'll get hurt." Isabella grabbed his hands. "Then we have to stop her, together." But neither of them knew how to calm the rage of a restless spirit. And as night fell, the haunting only grew darker. Ethan knew he had to confront his mother's spirit. He could no longer let her torment Isabella or control his life. That night, he took Isabella to his mother's gravesite, a small, unmarked patch of land near the village. The moonlight cast long shadows as the wind howled through the trees. Standing before the grave, Ethan called out, his voice trembling but firm. "Mother, I know you're here. Please, listen to me. You're scaring the woman I love." The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. Suddenly, the spirit of Ethan's mother appeared, her hollow eyes glowing with anger. Her voice was sharp and cold. "You think she loves you? She will ruin you, just like the world ruined me." Ethan stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Mother, you were hurt, but I am not you. Isabella makes me happy. She loves me for who I am, not what I have. Please, let me live my life." The spirit turned her gaze to Isabella, who stood frozen with fear. "And you," the ghost hissed. "Would you give up everything for him? Your crown, your power, your comfort?" Do you love him enough to leave it all behind? Isabella felt the weight of the question. Giving up the throne meant abandoning her entire world, the palace, the people, and her title. But when she looked at Ethan, she knew the answer. With a steady voice, she said, "Yes. I'll leave it all if it means being with him. I don't need a crown to love him." The spirit stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Slowly, her anger seemed to fade. Her twisted form softened, and a faint, sad smile appeared. You are braver than I thought," she whispered. "Perhaps, he is safe with you." The spirit looked at Ethan one last time. "I only wanted to protect you, my son. Be happy." With that, she began to fade into the night, her form dissolving into the wind. The air grew warm again, and the grave fell silent. Ethan and Isabella held each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces. The haunting was over, but their journey was just beginning. Isabella kept her promise and left the throne behind. Together, they built a simple life filled with love and peace. But sometimes, late at night, they would feel a soft breeze pass by, as if someone was still watching over them.